If you dance this waltz, I'll marry my son to you, William Thompson III declared loudly, slurring slightly as he raised his champagne glass toward a woman crouched on the marble floor. 200 of Manhattan's richest turned collectively to look. There, beside a shattered crystal tray, knelt Kesha Williams, 35 years old, contract cleaner, black, silent, and trembling not from fear but from fury held tightly in her chest. The glass pieces shimmered around her like ice, but the coldest thing in that ballroom was William's wicked grin. His words sliced through the air like a blade dipped in arrogance and racism. "Let's see if she can even keep time," he added, laughing hard. Gasps followed from shocked guests pretending to act appalled, but not one of them said a word to stop him. Jonathan Thompson, the millionaire's son, muttered, "Dad, that's enough." But his voice was drowned by delighted snickers from socialites in silk dresses and executives in black tie suits. William was drunk on whiskey and power. He strutted to the middle of the hall like a king sentencing someone to shame. "You clean floors? Now prove you can dance on them," he taunted, winking cruelly. Kesha didn't respond. She calmly picked up the last piece of crystal, placed it on the tray, stood, and looked straight into the eyes of the man who had just tried to destroy her with a sentence. Everyone expected her to run. Some expected tears. Others waited for her to beg. But what they got, in that heavy, chandelier-lit silence, was something none of them had seen coming. One word spoken with dignity. "I accept." Even the violinist paused, bow frozen on strings. William blinked, confused. "What did you say?" "I said I accept your challenge," Kesha repeated, her voice cool as glass. "But when I dance better than your wife, you'll keep your word." "Including the part about marrying your son," the room erupted in stunned whispers. William burst into laughter, delighted by what he saw as a joke spiraling further. But behind Kesha's calm eyes, behind that Maid uniform, there was a story no one in that room could have guessed. Because 15 years ago, before a tragic accident, Kesha Williams wasn't a cleaner. She was America's most celebrated dancer. Laughter rippled through the ballroom like clinking glass and poison, shallow and sharp, echoing between gold pillars and velvet curtains. Some guests found William Thompson's humiliating challenge hilarious. Others exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared intervene. That's how power worked in rooms like this. Kesha stood still, hands behind her back, her expression unreadable while her insides pulsed with fire and fragments of a life she hadn't spoken of in 15 years. Then she felt it, a gaze steady and familiar. Across the room, Jonathan Thompson wasn't laughing. The moment she met his eyes, something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or respect. He looked away quickly, but Kesha saw hesitation in his body, the slight tension of someone who didn't agree with what the room was turning into. And just beyond the notorious polished crowd, near the far column, a quiet man in a security uniform stepped forward, pretending to adjust his earpiece. It was Marcus, the building's head of security. For 2 decades, he had worked silently behind the scenes, unnoticed but always observing. Tonight, he moved a little closer to the center. No one had seen his face flicker in shock when Kesha had stood to accept the Waltz challenge. But he had seen hers before. 15 years ago, in another life, on another stage, he had worked backstage security at the National Theater when Kesha Williams wasn't a maid, but Kesha Morrow, principal soloist of the American National Ballet.
"No way," he muttered under his breath as memories flooded back. Standing ovations, reviews that compared her to legends, and one unforgettable night shortly before her disappearance.
A horrific car crash had ended it all. The papers said she'd never dance again. Some said she died. Most simply forgot, but Marcus hadn't. And now she was here, dressed as a maid, about to waltz for an audience that considered her beneath them. Kesha's posture was perfect, not a tremble in sight. Though trauma had taken her stage, it hadn't crushed her spine. William clapped dramatically. "Let's not wait any longer. DJ, get the music. Victoria, darling, come show us how real dancing looks." Across the room, Victoria Thompson, 50, ballroom trophy wife and self-acclaimed dance queen, sneered. "You really want me to stoop to this?" she asked with disdain. "She accepted my bet," William said smugly. "Now let's show the help what real dancers look like." But that's where he made his second mistake. Assuming Kesha was the help. Not the legend, the orchestra didn't play, but a classical waltz track drifted through hidden speakers as Victoria Thompson took center stage, her heels tapping against the pristine ballroom floor like she was walking into a royal court. The crowd clapped politely, eager to watch her perform. Not because she was remarkable, but because that's what wealthy circles did. They clapped to uphold appearances, not talent. Victoria began dancing with exaggerated flair, a smile frozen on her surgically perfected face, moving with the finesse of someone trained late in life, technically adequate, emotionally hollow. The crowd oohed and awed like they were watching something rare, but Marcus frowned slightly from the back of the room. It was ballroom theater built on ego, not expression. Still, Victoria twirled to the end and curtsied to applause, basking in artificial glory. Then all eyes turned to the woman in the cleaning uniform. "Now your turn," William called out mockingly, raising another glass of champagne. But Kesha wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the floor, quietly removing her apron, folding it with care, and giving it to another contract cleaner standing nearby. Her posture straightened as she stepped barefoot onto the grand center tile of the ballroom, each step quiet but deliberate. The room fell into sudden hush. The DJ, unsure, asked, "Same song?" Without blinking, she nodded. "From the beginning." A ripple of whispers swept through the audience. Some smirked. Others looked mildly intrigued, but Kesha wasn't watching them. Her eyes were closed, her breathing even, as the first notes of the familiar waltz began to play again, filling the space with a melody she knew better than the lines on her palm. This piece wasn't random. It was the last music she had ever danced to on the night of her final stage performance, just hours before the crash. It had once been her masterpiece, a performance so moving it reduced critics to tears. The doctors had said her body would never move the same again, that training was futile, that stages weren't built for damaged dancers. But they hadn't heard her promise whispered to herself in hospital beds and rehab centers, that if she ever danced again, it wouldn't be for applause. It would be as proof that elegance, resilience, and greatness could never be wiped away by one moment of tragedy, or by one man's arrogance masked as a joke. The moment the first violins sang their opening note, Kesha moved, not with hesitation, but with the silent confidence of someone who had never truly stopped dancing. Even if the world stopped watching, one foot slid across the floor with the precision of memory, her spine lifted as though pulled by divine thread, arms unfolding not merely as limbs, but as poetry woven through movement. The ballroom fell deadly still. The ones who came expecting a joke now found their mouths tightening, unsure whether to laugh or listen. But Kesha didn't dance for them. She moved like a woman remembering who she used to be, and reminding the room who she still was. Her first turn wasn't flashy, but something about the grace in her rotation made even the most skeptical guests lean forward. William Thompson, seated comfortably just a few minutes earlier and halfway through his fifth drink, now sat up, staring with furrowed brows. Victoria's confident smirk cracked slightly, and at the edge of the crowd, Marcus whispered under his breath, "Yes, there she is." Every motion Kesha made flowed into the next, her steps catching the rhythm as if waltzing with the very air. It wasn't just dance, it was storytelling. At every beat, her body told a tale of loss, of pain, of resilience, and now of undeniable greatness. When she spun again, this time faster and faster, her skirt catching air in a perfect circle, the collective gasp from the room was almost louder than the music. She lifted briefly into a modified grand jeté, airborne for just a heartbeat, but enough for ballroom veterans in the crowd to glance at each other in shock. That wasn't amateur flair. That was trained genius. A level of technique no one could fake, no matter how polished or dramatic Victoria's earlier twirls had been. Kesha landed flawlessly, softly pivoting into a pose that spoke to the years of precision ballet. The girl who had once been the star, the ghost of a legend reborn before their eyes. Eyes widened, jaws tightened. Some guests whispered now, not mockingly, but nervously. "Wait, do you recognize that sequence? I swear I've seen that before." Word was spreading. The myth was becoming fact. People had mocked her white apron and dark skin, her low-wage title and broken past. But now, the ballroom wasn't mocking. It was watching history walk back onto her stage. The room was no longer smiling, no longer sipping from champagne glasses or whispering behind manicured hands. The ballroom, once full of careless laughter and quiet cruelty, had been transformed into a theater of revelation. Kesha's movements now demanded reverence. Each rotation intensified, her arms slicing the air with a grace so disciplined, so profoundly intentional, it defied everything the audience thought they knew about the woman in the uniform. Her footwork glided over the slick floor like silk over glass. The signature geometry of a ballerina's training merged seamlessly into the rhythm of the waltz. Victoria Thompson, standing stiffly off to the side, looked entirely out of touch now, like a costume left behind on a forgotten stage. William's smirk had twisted into disbelief slowly curdling into dread. This was not part of his entertainment. This was something else, something dangerous to his ego. He abruptly motioned to the DJ, then stopped, realizing that interrupting her now would only confirm his own embarrassment. He was trapped in the spectacle he created, and now it belonged to her. A woman in the front murmured, "I know these movements. They're from that piece. What's her name? Kesha something?" Another guest turned pale. "Kesha Morrow," he said, stunned. "The one who vanished after the accident." It spread like fire. Realization swept through the crowd faster than rumors at a country club fundraiser. Eyes widened. Fingers nervously clutched shimmering necklaces. Marcus, still filming from the back, allowed himself a quiet smile. He had known. But the public needed proof, and this was it. Just then, Kesha entered the final stretch, the part only professionals dared attempt. A series of fouettes, powerful turns that demanded excellence. 1, 2, 3. Her balance perfect. Her control flawless. Her story written in motion. No pain showed on her face, only liberation. The woman who'd once been named America's Swan had returned, not to reclaim applause, but to take her dignity from the very mouths that tried to swallow it. When the music slowed and finally stopped, she froze in a final pose, arms extended, chin lifted, feet in perfect fifth position, eyes staring into the crowd like she saw each of them for what they truly were. The room, stunned into absolute silence, did not move, not even to breathe. Then slowly, one clap began, then another, then thunder. The applause exploded like a thunderclap, jolting the room awake from its own shame. What had started as polite taps from a few brave souls became a roaring ovation from the crowd who, seconds earlier, had watched with smug superiority. Now they stood to their feet, clapping wildly, some shouting, "Bravo!" and others merely watching her with teary-eyed disbelief. Kesha didn't bow. She didn't need to. Her upright posture, her calm eyes, and her steady breath were her answer to every insult, every bet, every ounce of mockery William Thompson III had poured over her. And across the room, that very man couldn't clap, couldn't move. His face contorted between fury, embarrassment, and disbelief, like a child caught misbehaving in front of the headmaster. Victoria, meanwhile, had slipped into the shadows at the edge of the room, pretending to sip from her glass as though she weren't the one who'd just been artistically annihilated. But the audience wasn't watching her anymore. They were focused on the woman in the center, once nameless, now unforgettable. "That's not just some maid," someone whispered too loudly. "That's Kesha Morrow, the ballerina who vanished." "But she died, didn't she?" replied another, confusion crackling through each syllable. Cameras came up now, not to humiliate, but to immortalize. Phones filmed, flashes blinked, and social feeds filled with the impossible headline, "The Maid just outdanced New York's ballroom champion." And then, above the applause, a voice from the back crescendoed over the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to reintroduce the one and only Kesha Morrow, former principal soloist of the American National Ballet." It was Marcus. Calm, composed, phone still recording in one hand, tear in one eye. A gasp tore through the crowd, as if the collective memory had just clicked into place. The name rang like a bell toll, familiar, proud, magical. It was as if a ghost had walked into the room and stolen air from their lungs. Kesha Mara wasn't dead. She was dancing better than ever. William turned slowly, lips parted, hands still, realizing for the first time in his extravagant, gilded life that he was now the punchline of his own performance. And it was only just beginning, because the moment Keisha's truth hit that room, the power shifted, and it wasn't his anymore. All the polished arrogance drained from William Thompson III's face as murmurs spread through the crowd like wildfire, carrying two devastating truths. First, that the black maid he had tried to humiliate was none other than legendary ballerina Kesha Mara, and second, that every cruel word he had spoken just hours ago was now echoing across recording devices held by 200 elite witnesses. He turned to the nearest guest, a longtime investor named Franklin, and tried to chuckle. "What, are we really taking this seriously?" It was a joke, a party gag. Franklin didn't smile. Neither did anyone else. Their applause had shifted to quiet muttering, a change in atmosphere so thick it choked William's ego mid-sentence. Kesha, still standing in the center of the dance floor, turned toward him with the same calm expression that had silenced him the first time. "Mr. Thompson," she said firmly but gracefully, "you made a public bet, and I met every condition. I danced better than your wife in front of witnesses after accepting your challenge in full. So now the question is, are you a man of your word?" Eyes turned to him. Phones were still rolling. There was no escape. He tried to laugh again, teeth clenched. "Come on now, sweetheart, you know I didn't mean it seriously. I don't just marry my son off in exchange for pirouettes." Kesha didn't blink. "That's not what you said an hour ago. You said, and I quote," she looked directly at Marcus, who immediately tapped his phone, "If she dances better than my wife, I'll marry my son to her on the spot." And just like that, William's own voice played clear as day, his mocking arrogance preserved in digital clarity. The room went utterly still again. Victoria's face flushed deep red as she slowly backed away, melting into a wall. Jonathan Thompson, standing not far from his father, finally stepped forward. "Dad, whether it was a bet or not, it was disgusting. You humiliated her, and she didn't just prove you wrong, she crushed you with elegance." William turned to him sharply. "You're defending her?" Jonathan stared hard at his father, then turned toward Kesha. "No, I'm standing with her. There's a difference." The ballroom may have been William's kingdom that night, but now all its guests were watching their so-called king fall quicker than a castle built on pride. By the next morning, the Thompson scandal had erupted far beyond chandeliers and champagne flutes, splashed across every social media feed, headline, and morning talk show panel in the country. Videos of the maid who danced like a swan had gone viral overnight. Every second of Kesha's breathtaking waltz now looped with commentary that compared her grace against William's arrogance, and each playback chiseled away at the marble facade of his reputation. Business insiders shared clips of him drunkenly announcing the marriage bet, branding him not just a bigot, but a reckless liability to his company. Hashtags like Makshu Waltz of Justice and The Maid and the Millionaire trended globally, with millions insisting that Thompson Holdings address the scandal publicly. Calls from partners, sponsors, and board members rained down like gunfire, each message carrying the same demand: explain this or step aside. William, consumed by rage and fear, stormed into his office only to find 40% of the board already assembled by video, their expressions cold and corporate. Franklin, usually his closest ally, spoke first. "Your behavior has cost us 3 major contracts in 12 hours. The press is labeling us a discriminatory empire. Investors are rattled. This is not sustainable." William refused to back down, slamming his fist on the desk. "It was a party bet, damn it, a joke. You're all cowards if you think I'll apologize to a janitor for entertaining my guests." Silence followed, but on the other screen, a female board member leaned forward. Not a janitor. A world-class ballerina. The kind of woman the world has unanimously decided to admire. William froze. Meanwhile, in a modest apartment on the east side, Kesha sat by her simple kitchen table scrolling through messages flooding her phone. Invitations from the Lincoln Center. Offers from international dance companies, thousands of strangers thanking her for reminding them that dignity knows no uniform. She smiled faintly, humbled but steady, remembering that her true goal had never been vengeance. It was to rise when everything said she couldn't. Marcus called to confirm the video's reach, his voice brimming with pride. "They're calling you legendary again, Ms. Morrow." Across town, Jonathan stood before reporters and cameras, refusing to defend his father, declaring instead that leadership now required integrity. In one night, William had lost control of a family, a fortune and a future, while the maid he mocked found her past returned as a crown. 6 months later, the hushed memory of that disastrous ballroom confrontation had become one of the most famous cautionary tales in Manhattan's elite circles, while the name Kesha Morrow once again glowed proudly across theater marquees, magazines, and television specials. William Thompson III, once untouchable, had been forced by shareholders to resign, his empire fractured under the weight of scandal, his invitations vanished, his so-called friends gone silent. He became not a king of industry, but a lesson whispered at cigar lounges about how arrogance can kill even the biggest giant's legacy. Victoria had filed for divorce, fleeing to Europe to avoid the embarrassment, while Jonathan now led a reshaped version of Thompson Holdings, one that traded ostentation for responsibility, channeling profits into education and community projects. His first official partnership forged with the new Kesha Morrow Center for the Arts. On opening night, beneath the golden lights of Lincoln Center, Kesha didn't dance as an entertainer for ticket holders, but as a teacher, guiding a group of children from immigrant families across a stage more prestigious than they ever imagined standing upon. The ovation was thunderous, not just for her artistry, but for her choice to use her renewed platform to lift others higher. Outside, cameras flashed as reporters asked Jonathan about the rumors that he and Kesha were inseparable. He smiled but gave no scandal, answering only, "Integrity finds its own company." Later that evening, Jonathan found her on the patio, where she was watching her students laugh freely with sparkling eyes that mirrored the sunset. He offered her a bouquet of roses, not as a performance gesture, but as something quiet, personal. "Ready for dinner now?" he asked softly, extending his arm. Kesha chuckled lightly, no longer the woman in an apron forced into ridicule, no longer the legend haunted by tragedy, but a woman who had redefined herself on her own terms. "This time," she replied, sliding her hand into his with ease, "we'll write the story ourselves." And so the true revenge was never in shaming William Thompson on his own ballroom floor, though that alone had been history. It was in proving that dignity, resilience and mastery outlast every insult, every prejudice, every fall. Kesha's dance of defiance had become a movement of rebirth, reminding the world that nobility does not come from wealth or names etched on skyscrapers, but from courage and grace that no amount of cruelty can erase.